sense about what is the programs that we have, as well as some of the membership benefits. We're not going to do speed dating. We've already done networking. So we are a forum that engages Bay Area and San Francisco professionals in strategic thinking, planning, and execution by exploring cutting-edge ideas. We really, I think today is a very good example of kind of cutting-edge look at sustainability and how to integrate that into some of our corporate strategic thinking. Our vision is to create a growing, thriving, vital chapter. We won the Chapter Award of the Year, so we are well on course. Hosting the most relevant strategic cutting-edge conversations. And we truly want to work on the conversation part. In fact, I think a lot of the board today, we're engaged with many of you here around what you're doing. That's part of the conversation to help us understand what you want and also what you can bring to these discussions. And so you'll see at the end of today, there'll be a Q&A that will allow that conversation to occur. So with that, I will now introduce Gil Friend. Gil is somebody who has a rich and varied background. He's a CEO, he's a consultant, he's an author. He has been on a number of local boards, and he has worked in a number of top 500, Fortune 500 companies. I'm going to give you a few of the specifics. He has worked for over 38 years in business science and policy, particularly as it relates to environmental and sustainability issues. Some of his clients have been Coca-Cola, Agile Technology, Levi Strauss, Hewlett-Packard. So he has worked across industries and worked with very large companies around issues of how to think about environmental and sustainability kind of charters. He's been a founding board member of the Sustainability Business Alliance, and he serves on a number of different boards. He has been a member of the San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom's Clean Tech Advisory Council, and for the last 2 years is one of the top 25 movers and shakers in clean tech. Congratulations. He's an author of a number of books. The one about truth about green business is here for purchase, and they're $20. And just leave with Gil the $20 for that. We'll give you a background of his current thinking. He's also served on the Presidio University as an adjunct faculty. And a little known fact is he's a black belt Aikido. So it's a great pleasure that we welcome Gil to present to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and again, thanks again for getting me here. And thank you all for coming and for bearing with us with our various technology challenges of the evening. I think we got things more or less perfect. There we go. Almost done. While they're doing that, why are you here? Just a few of you pop up.
I'm interested in the topic of sustainability.
How many of you work in sustainability? And how many of you work in business? Consultants? Policy? Okay. All right, let's get a sense of who's in the room. I'm going to talk for about a half hour or so, and then we'll do maybe Q&A, maybe more open discussion and live. We'll see where we go. I want to talk about the business case for sustainability because people keep on asking, what is that? And for some reason, Dan, push a button there. For some reason, this seems to be an elusive business case. It's hard for people to get hold of. It seems to be like water through their hands. And to me, it's really mysterious why that is, because the case is so evident, it's so clear, it's so powerful, that there is this mysteriously elusive sustainability business case that we need to find and capture and unpack and make more available throughout the society, because most businesses don't get it yet. Just by way of introduction, a bit about Natural Logic. Natural Logic is a strategy company based in Berkeley. We're 12 years old. Our job is to help our clients design, implement, and measure profitable sustainability strategies. And we didn't have the word profitable in there at first. We realized we needed to put it in there because people don't understand that that's what we mean. This is not about tree hugger. This is not about goodwill. This is not about nice thing to do, although it is all those things. This is also about profitable, competitive advantage, brand building, strategic approaches to business in the 21st century. How do we do this? We do this by embedding the laws of nature at the heart of enterprise. And I'll say more a little bit later about what that means. Why is that the approach? approach. Why is the laws of nature the resource that we use to guide this work? Well, why reinvent the wheel when the R&D's already been done? You know, the playbook is there. The rules are there. The methodologies are there. They've been time-tested over billions of years. We know how to do this. So that's the framework. Some of the clients you see around the screen there. But the challenge really is to do this in a way that is sufficient to the challenges of building a new economy on this planet. But the last class I taught at Presidio last fall, one of the students said, so why do you do this work? I thought for a moment, and the words came out kind of for the first time in this formulation, is to transform the economy of an entire planet. This planet, in one generation. That's what the challenge is, and that's what we're orienting ourselves to in the work that we do with clients. And to help uncover the opportunities and the hidden profits that are disclosed by this 4 billion years of open source research and development. Just briefly how we work, you can go to our website for more details, but we will, some of the ways that we engage with clients is strategic briefings with executive teams to help them understand the landscape of risk and opportunity that they're facing in coming decades. We have a series of rapid diagnostics offerings that very quickly can get to an assessment of different aspects of the business's health and opportunity and risk in relation to sustainability and sustainable operations. We are increasingly doing more strategic sustainability coaching, one-on-one executive coaching, typically, but with a sustainability content to it, so it brings both the process and content domains together to help people who are already successful and already accomplished kick the game to the next level, both personally and in their organization. And then for those who are ready for more comprehensive engagement, our full cycle sustainability program takes a company through a cycle of engaging the people, assessing risk and opportunity, designing new strategies, mobilizing the organizations to deliver them, and evaluating the results. And you can't see it on the line on the PowerPoint, but that really is a cycle. That's a rinse and repeat. You never stop going through that. And so that's sort of a window into the kinds of things that we're doing. So we're in a challenging situation. A lot of trends look like this. Oil, if you flip it over, you get oil prices. But we've got stock prices. This is Arctic ice. This is peak oil. This is the health and viability and resilience of fisheries and soils and other primary resource groups. So there's a lot of trends that are pointing in the wrong direction. There's certainly a world of uncertainty and challenge that everyone faces, and this demands massive change. And the change is not just change in technology, because we're in just unprecedentedly unpredictable times. We think about it 40 years ago. 40 years ago, internet. No internet before that. Some of us remember this, some of you don't, but this is a new thing. 20 years ago, Berlin Wall came down. 7 years ago, there was no Facebook. 5 years ago, there was no Twitter. Clay Shirky says there's no point in doing 5-year plans in a world that changes this rapidly. So how do you orient yourself in this? And the change is not just about technology. It's about changing the way we live. It's about inventing new kind of infrastructure, intelligent infrastructure that is embedded well, let's say it a different way, that intelligent infrastructure and relearning our relationship to the living systems that sustain the human economy. This is profound change. We don't even, we barely have the ways to think about it. We certainly don't have the tools in tools of management and accounting and analysis to enable us to really grasp the opportunity, but those are the hearts of the challenge. Key to understanding this is the statement that we have on the cover of The Truth About Green Business, which is that you don't have to choose between making money and making sense. Unfortunately, a lot of companies don't know this. A lot of companies, most companies, frankly, that I talk with, most environmentalists that I talk with, most government regulators that I talk with don't understand this and assume that there is some necessary trade-off. Some companies have an inkling but seem lost in how to get to it. And one data point in particular that stands out for me is about a little bit over a year and a half ago, the Boston Consulting Group, sorry to name a competitor in your home here.
That's okay.
Boston Consulting Group.
We respect them.
And the Sloan Management School put out a report on the business of sustainability. I encourage you to take a look at it. And there's quite a lot in it, but one of the things that really stood out in my mind was, well, actually, it wasn't that they said that 90 or 92% of the 1,500 global executives who they interviewed said that sustainability, was extremely important to their company. 92% said that they were addressing sustainability in some way, but more than 70% said they hadn't developed a business case for sustainability. And these are some of the best companies in the world. And in fact, well, you can see it here, the majority of sustainability actions undertaken to date were focused on compliance, meeting regulatory requirements. Big deal. We tell our clients to ignore the regulations. And they say, what? Let's stop, to clarify. We're not saying to violate the regulations. We're not saying you should, incur fines and go to jail. But don't run your company guided by the regulators. Run your company guided by the business case, guided by the demands of the marketplace, guided by the laws of nature. If you do that and do that well, you will exceed compliance requirements in every regulatory regime everywhere in the world. So compliance becomes a consequence, not a goal. But for most of the companies, that was the focus of their sustainability initiatives. And to my mind, this is as far from a business case and about as exciting as flossing your teeth every day. It's a good thing to do. You're going to be healthier if you do it than if you don't do it. But it's not something that adds value or enriches your life. It's not the reason that you get up in the morning. You're motivated by some other kind of purpose. Then, before I go to bed tonight, I'm going to floss my teeth. And from a business perspective, you don't want a CEO getting up in the morning saying, my goal today for my company is to keep us out of jail. That's not an organizing principle for a great organization. It's something else. The challenge is that most companies won't move without understanding the business case. And sadly, most people, and as I said before, most people in business, most people in NGOs, most people in government assume that there's a necessary conflict between sustainability or greening or environmental quality and profitability. They assume there's some kind of necessary trade-off between environmental performance and economic performance. The most optimistic of this crew assumes that, well, it's going to cost me money in the short term and I'm going to make the money in the long term. I have to accept some pain now for some benefit later on, which is curious because that's not how people usually think about investment. And that's true about most investment. You put money on the table now, you make some money back over X number of years. There's not this moral judgment about that. There's a question about what's the ROI. Is it a healthy ROI? Are the risks balanced? Are they appropriate? We just think about it in a different way. But there are a bunch of problems with this kind of thinking. One is that it's just mired in this short-term thinking, which is an endemic problem in modern business. It sees sustainability as a cost rather than as an investment. And if I'm going to buy a piece of capital equipment, I don't think of it as a cost. I think about it as an investment that's going to improve productive capacity or improve time to market or improve quality. It's sort of a different frame for the same thing of putting money on the table for a certain result. Still baffling to me, companies often require higher hurdle rates of sustainability investments than of other investments. There's no economic rationale for that, but you find it again and again. Assumptions in general blind people to the facts. I was just telling someone this afternoon, got a client about a meeting I had some years ago with half a dozen vice presidents of competing companies in an industry talking about the sustainability business case. And over the course of about an hour and a half, I went through the story 5 different times with 5 different examples of 5 different companies showing the investments they'd made, the impact that it had on their product, the return on investment it generated. And each time I'd go through the story, one of these VPs would say, well, we can't afford to do that. This is environmental stuff, we can't afford to do that. Our profit margins are too small, we can't afford to do that. And so I'd roll out another story of, this one 40% return on investment per year, this one 25, this one 53, this one 18. Investments that were essentially risk-free because they were technology improvements that once you put them into place were just going to crank the way they did. After an hour and a half, one of these VPs, a very capable and accomplished person in a successful company, leaned across the table to me and said, wait a minute, let me get this straight. Are you telling me we can make money doing this stuff? And for me, it was like one of these sky-opening moments because I realized that the assumptions ran so deep that this person, who was a very capable executive, literally couldn't see the numbers on the page. He was looking at pro formas, and he couldn't see it because the data clashed with the assumption. And what's concerning to me is that I see this again and again in every industry, in every domain of activity. I see it from business people who say, we can't afford to do this greening thing because it's going to sap our profits and we're going to have to move and you're going to lose jobs. I see it in environmentalists who say, you big bad corporations should be willing to take a slightly lower rate of profit for the good of the society. Same assumption, right? I see it in government regulators who say, we should take taxpayers' money and give it to your company to encourage you to do the right thing, as though you wouldn't do it for intrinsic reasons. So all three of these groups that disagree on so many things in this domain agree on this one thing, and they're all wrong. Because the fact is that there's no necessary conflict. And based on our work with hundreds of companies in dozens of different industries, the tracking that we've been doing of other businesses around the world, the monitoring that we do of our competitors' work with these same kind of companies, there is no necessary conflict between sustainability performance and environmental performance. And in fact, they often go hand in hand. And that's why we say on the cover of the book, you don't have to choose between making money and making sense. Now, it's not an automatic guarantee of anything. You still have to be smart. You still have to have the right strategy. You still have to have good engineering. You still have to have brilliant execution. All the things you need to be successful in business still have to be there. The sustainability commitment doesn't replace any of that, but it certainly both reinforces them. And we would say that if you put sustainability at the heart of business, or to mix the metaphors, pardon me, if you look at your business through a sustainability lens, if you look through the lens of how do living systems work, what do we know about 4 billion years almost of living systems on the planet? How do we look at our business and our competitive landscape and our supply chain and our organization through that lens? You see different things. You see different opportunities. You see different risks, and you see risks earlier. Your opportunity space shifts in very powerful ways. Why else would Henry Kravis of KKR say the business case for environmental management has never been stronger? You may know KKR has a green portfolio program working with Environmental Defense Fund. They just announced, I think it was last year, that they're expanding their green portfolio program from a token pool of investments to 20% of their entire massive portfolio. Kravis is not doing that because he's a tree hugger, though he may be, I don't know. He's doing that because he's an extremely successful and disciplined and strategic business person with a terrific track record over the past several decades. And he's moving big money in this direction, as many people are. In fact, 86% of the Global 500 report that they're seeing significant business opportunities in carbon mitigation. So what does the business case need to do? It needs to do three things. It needs to provide a good return on investment. That's the most obvious thing. But investment not just of money, investment of time, because there's opportunity cost in any decision that you make, and investment of brand, because you're putting your brand on the table and potentially at risk anytime you set a direction for your company. It needs, and these may be a bit obvious to you, but let me say that it needs to generate more value than the other potential uses of that time and money and brand equity. And it needs to do this in financial dimensions, operational dimensions, and strategic dimensions. Multiple elements in all of these. There's the impact on cost. So to be very simple, reducing waste, reducing energy waste, water waste, material waste, reduces cost of materials, which means more profit. Improving the cost structure is a direct place where improving environmental and economic performance go hand in hand. Brand value. For most companies today, the value of the company greatly exceeds the physical assets that the company owns. KPMG, in fact, did a study, I guess it was about 5 years ago. It was the first one that I saw from a major firm that said at that point intangibles were more than 55% of the value of most companies. Probably a different number today. But it was a very important marker to say that what we normally think about as assets is not where the value is. It's in brand and reputation. And reputation is hard-won and easily lost. And the key there is integrity. Impact on innovation. Many companies are finding that sustainability becomes a powerful driver of innovation of product and process and business relationships and supply chain relationships and on down the line. Surprisingly, for a lot of companies, recruitment and retention is an enormous piece of value in the business case here. One of the most expensive things that a company does is hire good people. And if they're smart, keep good people. And the best and the brightest these days want to work for companies that are concerned about sustainability, that have and display high integrity around that. And we've heard from recruiters in a wide range of industries that this is really key. It's made an enormous difference in the talent they can attract. And when you think about ROI in terms of, well, let's invest in reducing our carbon footprint in the plant, and that generates a certain percentage ROI from energy savings and monetization of carbon savings, it doesn't touch on the cost and impact of recruitment and retention. Which again is not only a financial issue, but goes to the talent and resource capacity, the ability to innovate the change that the company has going on into the future. License to operate is really fundamental. Will you be able to play in the markets that you want to play in? Very dramatic example of that in the last few years. Some of you may know about the European Union's new regulations in electronics and other product spaces in 2005, I believe it was. Europe promulgated the WEEE regulations, waste electronics and electrical equipment, requiring that companies take back electronic products at the end of life and properly recycle them. The following year, the ROAS standards, the restriction on hazardous substances, which ruled out 4 heavy metals and 2 polybrominated nasty things from the electronics supply chain. In 2005, 6 weeks before the WEEE directive was going to take effect as law in the EU, 6-7 years after it had been scheduled up, my colleague Pam Gordon at Technology Forecaster did a global survey in the electronics industry and found that 44% of the industry was not prepared to meet the European standards 6 weeks before the standards triggered, with 1/3 of global revenues for that industry in the European market. So Pam and I and Mike Kirshner from Design Chain Associates did an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal suggesting that this might border on violation of fiduciary duty to shareholders. Because look, shareholders aren't supposed to monkey in the details of management. That's a management issue, but here you have 1/3 of your global revenues at risk. 5-6 years of certainty that the hammer was going to fall on this. 44% of you not prepared. What are you thinking? And if that's still uncertain, 44% not prepared means that 56% were, which means that it was not impossible. I mean, if you could say it's impossible, you have a fighting chance. But if more than half of you are ready and half of you are not, there's a problem there. The problem goes deeper because some companies like Hewlett-Packard, one of our clients, had identified this early on and built a business around this. They said there's going to be a business in the waste stream of electronic products from Europe. They formed a joint venture with Noranda, Mining and Metallics, and said let's profitably harvest precious metals out of dead computers and make money doing it. So there's the landscape. Half said, okay, we'll comply. Half said, we can't comply, please leave us alone. And a couple said, let's go make some money and make things better at the same time. I had lunch with Gary Pfeiffer some years ago. He was the CFO of DuPont Corporation at the time, and somebody asked him, Mr. Pfeiffer, why doesn't Wall Street get it about sustainability? This was after he had spent a half hour describing truly impressive programs out of DuPont. Shifting, in the process of shifting their feedstocks from fossil fuel to renewable-based chemistry. They've gotten so good at waste prevention in their own operations that they've built a division to provide waste prevention services to their supply chain, customers and suppliers. And the last time I checked, which was admittedly, several years ago, that was a $250 million line of business for DuPont, helping their customers buy less of their product. So what's that about? That's a whole new business model. That's thinking about what's the value that they're delivering to their customers and where do they get a profitable exchange with their customers. Gary said that Wall Street really does get it about sustainability. When someone challenged him, he said, why doesn't Wall Street get it? He said, they really do get it. Wall Street, he said, is looking for 3 things from us. They're looking for us to make money. You can build out some circles then as we go. They're looking for us to make more money. That's really clear. Everybody understands that, right? They're looking for us to make more money faster. Net present value of $1 today versus $1 5 or 10 years from now. And they're looking to reduce any risk or any barriers that stand between us and making more money faster. That's what Wall Street wants from us, he said. And that's the DuPont Sustainability Initiative. And he said it's the best business strategy we have had in decades. 340% increase in share value on top of a 60% reduction in environmental footprint, is the way he put it. Now, may not be true anymore, but the direction of that is what I want you to hear about. This was a disciplined business analysis from a CFO, not a sustainability director, of one of the leading companies in the world. A company that has a certain degree of smarts about this. DuPont in the 1990s set out to reduce their waste streams by 70% over 5 years. In the early 1990s. They regrouped in 1995 and said, what do we do next? Do we declare victory and stop? Do we take it down another 10%? Do we discuss what the goals should be? And there was Ed Woolard, who was the CEO and chairman at the time, said that the decision they took, which was to go to zero waste, was an easier decision for DuPont leadership than the 70% reduction decision had been 5 years earlier. Why? Well, part of it was that they had ridden the learning curve and they understood, they had a window into what was possible and what the impact of that was. Part of it was they got smarter about how to do these things, but part of it apparently was that they couldn't come up with any other goal that made any sense to them. They couldn't come up with any amount of waste that they wanted to tolerate. Because they understood that waste is, we always put the word waste in quotes. Dan knows this from the style rules at Natural Logic. We put the word waste in quotes because there's no such thing. It's a contextual term. It's not a taxonomic definition of a class of materials any more than a weed is a particular kind of plant. Right? A weed is a plant out of place. Right? A rose in a wheat field is a weed. A rose in your garden is anything but that. So they couldn't figure out any amount of waste that made sense because they understood that waste is materials that you have bought and paid for, and plant and equipment and labor and management and opportunity cost and so forth that you have bought and paid for to process these materials that you then ship out of your plant and pay someone to take away and process or treat instead of give it to a customer who gives you money for it. So the financial relationship around waste is entirely backwards and stupid. If I have a product, I give you the product and you give me money. If I have waste, I give you the waste and I give you money. That's a foolish business proposition. And DuPont figured that out and said, let's do zero waste, and let's do zero defects, and let's do zero injuries. Bold. And in a strange way, very much out of their roots. DuPont has long had the best safety record in the chemical industry. You know why? Remember how they started? Early 19th century munitions company, making dynamite and things like that. Most factory towns, if you recall your American history, there's the dark satanic mill and there's crummy worker housing around it, and 10 miles away on a mountaintop is the management and owner's housing. DuPont housed their managers right near the plant with their workers. They had the best safety record in the business. Is this surprising? This is what we call management cybernetics. This is feedback systems. This is very straightforward. You get what you reward. People pay attention to what matters to them. And they figured out early on how to make that very direct. And they've taken it into a powerful direction. So the other component of the business case is risk, which is why CFOs like Pfeiffer are very much focused on this. Risk is where a lot of this opportunity, CFO is where a lot of this opportunity lives. And so, we could spend a lot of time talking about this because you know this very well, but one of the big risks is prices, rising prices, price volatility, reliability of supply, market expectations, what your customers are going to want from you. I'd add to the market expectations innovation challenges, not just what your market will expect from you, but what your competitors will do before you do it. The rising regulatory bar, which surprising to many people that I talk with is not just being led by the EU, as it has been for many years in the United States, but now being led by China and Brazil. China has higher automobile fuel efficiency standards than the United States. China's moving aggressively on renewable energy, has steeper carbon reduction goals than the United States. Unknown to most American business people, China some years ago passed at the national level a cyclical economy policy, basically putting zero waste and closed-loop manufacturing systems on the national agenda for what is now the second largest economy in the world and will be the largest in most of our lifetimes. So if you want to play as a global player in these other markets, you can no longer assume that meet U.S. standards and coast everywhere else, because it may actually be higher everywhere else. Cohn & Wolfe does an annual brand survey. The one they released last year at the Sustainable Brands Conference in June looked at consumer preferences around environmental issues in a couple of dozen developed and developing countries, and everybody was quite startled to find that the consumer expectation for green products was higher in China, Brazil, and India than in the United States and Britain and Germany. People were just stunned. And it's, it's more complex than that. These are very diverse countries with, with vast differences in their consumer populations, but it was a really different picture than what we would have seen just a few years ago. This is a little hard to see on the screen for, just the familiar image of the hurricane off the coast of the eastern seaboard. But the world we're in is like not just one hurricane off the coast, but 3 or 4 or 5 stacked up there, one coming after another, in what Peter Schwartz would call the inevitable surprises. Oh my God, who would have imagined that there'd be oil disruption in the Middle East? I'm totally unprepared for that, Will. So, when we think about it, we've got global economic meltdown, we've got credit crisis, we've got climate change, we've got water, both supply and water temperature. We've had nuclear much in mind lately. 2 years ago in France, the summers were so hot that the surface waters in France were so warm they couldn't cool their nuclear power plants. That throttled back power all over France because river temperatures were higher. So when you think about climate change, don't just think about 2 degrees Celsius heat up. Think about rippling effects through the global economy. Here in the Bay Area, the mid-range climate projections have us losing 55% of the Sierra snowpack by the end of the century. That's the mid-range projection. This is not about bad skiing. This is about the water supply for Northern California. Energy volatility, regulations, ocean viability, biodiversity, soils, toxics, on and on. The list goes on and on. So in the face of all this uncertainty, where do you find certainty? How do you build a strategy? How do you find a place to stand that can give you a fighting chance to be viable in the face of a world of change? And hold the question, because I'll come back to that. I've actually already given you the answer at the beginning, but we'll come back to it. So in the land of risk, there's this question of fiduciary duty, which is not just an idle concept, but I would expect to see shareholder suits brought against boards and executives for failure to adequately engage some of what, again, what Peter Schwartz called inevitable surprises. There will be surprises. People will have trouble. Things will succeed or fail. It's a normal part of business. But when you have something coming right at you, clearly in view, known to everybody, and you keep on saying, I'm not going to deal with that because I don't believe it's really there, that might not be taking proper care of shareholder resources. And I think somebody's going to take a fall for that at some point. There are significant business opportunities here. The poster child story on that is General Electric, which declared the Eco-Imagination program 5 years ago, said they were going to make $5 billion in new top-line revenue. In addition to cost reductions, in 5 years it was $10 billion with new top-line revenue. Jeff Immelt doubled down the investment in Eco-Imagination for coming years. He was out here in San Francisco last fall with a roadshow about Eco-Imagination. And what struck me most about his presentation was how classically, if you just took out the word green and sustainable from what he was saying, what you heard was a AAA global company product launch in all the classic language of what that would look like. It just happened to have these words sustainability and green in it. And not to discredit it by saying that, because within that were 50 different product launches you were talking about, most of which were quite stunning. And you could see the innovation, and you could see the profitability, and you could see the enthusiasm for his team around this. So significant business opportunities is what will drive most companies, and last and certainly not least, it's the right thing to do. And this is back to making money or making sense. If you assume that the right thing to do is going to cost you money and put your business at risk and sap your profits and lower your salary, a lot of people might have a dilemma with that, moral or otherwise. If there's no necessary conflict, well, heck, let's just do the right thing and take market share and increase profits and reduce risk and feel better when we go home at the end of the day and win on every front. The roadmap, as I said before, is the 3.8 or so billion years, but who's counting, of open source research conducted by Earth's living systems for us, and the playbook is wide open. We know the basic rules. We know that for the most part, nature runs on renewable energy. It has cyclical processes. The waste of one organism is the food of the next. The stuff is digestible, which is to say there are no persistent large accumulations of toxic materials. Even something as toxic as rattlesnake venom is synthesized moments before it's needed in the viper pits of the head of the snake, injected or not, into the prey. And if that doesn't take effect, if there's nothing to inject, this venom is dissociated safely at ambient temperature into constituent chemicals. Rattlesnakes don't haul around tanker trucks of toxic waste behind them. You know, can we be as smart as a rattlesnake? Brain the size of, what, a pinhead? You know, when a chicken makes another chicken, where's the waste? None. Can we be as smart as a chicken? When a tree makes another tree, well, actually, what's the purpose of a tree? What's the function of a tree? What does a tree do?
Makes
Anybody?
another tree.
Huh?
Makes another tree.
Makes another tree,
CO2.
oxygen. What else are smart folks? What does a tree do?
Shade.
Shade.
Sequester CO2.
Sequesters CO2. Makes apples. Drops leaf litter becomes soil. It's habitat for various kinds of
Translates
creatures.
solar energy to energy
Translates solar
available
energy
to other species.
into energy available to other species and into structure and there's, you know, we could make a list of at least 60 functions for a tree. We tend to build things that have one function, or maybe two, or maybe three. Nature tends to build things that have many. There may be a lesson there worth paying attention to. Information flows and coordination of activities and communication is relatively flat compared to the kind of power-driven hierarchies that we tend to have in human systems. I say that not as a moral issue, but because that enables the point of decision being close to point of action, less abstraction of information, which we tend to be endemic in our systems. And, you know, bottom line here, as Janine Benyus is fond of pointing out, is that nature runs a very powerful research and development laboratory where defective products are rapidly recalled by their manufacturer. Might be a lesson in that. So how do you use a business case? You know, do you use it to determine what you should do? Or do you use it to determine how you should do it? I would argue that the second is much more interesting than the first. The numbers can't tell you what you should do. They can only tell you what the impact well, they'll tell you how well you're doing. But what you should do has to come from you. It has to come from, you know, the numbers can maybe help you make the case and maybe help you defend the case. They can sometimes help you recognize and evaluate opportunities. But the numbers aren't a substitute for insight and leadership and courage. You know the answer about what you should do. What you should do is look inside your own heart and your own purpose and ask yourself the question of what you're really here to do, what your business is really here to do. At the personal level, it's, you know, what's your purpose in your life, in your career, in the work that you've chosen? What are you trying to accomplish in your, 4 score, 5 score years on this planet? From a company's perspective, it's what's the business here to do? And, you know, Milton Friedman taught us all to think that the purpose of business is to maximize return to shareholders. In fact, he would say that wasn't the primary purpose. He would say that's the only purpose. But if you ask the same question of A.P. Giannini, who founded the Bank of America not far from here 125 years ago, he said that the purpose of this bank is not to maximize return to shareholders, it's to provide credit facilities for immigrant communities in San Francisco who don't have access to credit. And, he said, wasn't done, he said, and if we do that well, we will make money. Bank of America. Whole Foods, John Mackey, Kip Tindall Container Store. The list of CEOs goes on and on who recognize that that profit is a way of keeping score. It's not a purpose in itself. You know, Michael Jordan didn't go out on the field for a basketball game saying, my goal is to score the highest number of points. It was to play a game with a team in a way that was effective, that if it worked well would result in the highest number of points in world championships and so forth. So looking to core purpose, both individually and corporately, I think is really key to getting at the business case and to operating from insight and leadership and courage, with money as the result. Not in any way unimportant, because sustainability requires economic sustainability just as much as biological sustainability. But we need to understand what's leading and what's following. If you try to anticipate every possible use for new business models, Joe Ito said, it won't work. He said you have to allow for applications that are hard to predict, locally driven, and full of weirdness. Spontaneity, creativity, autonomy, what Stafford Beer called autonomy within a coherent whole. How do you have an organization that enables the individual actors at every level of the company to be operating in full personal creativity and yet be aligned with the mission of the organization? Traditionally, we try to get that with that top-down hierarchy. That gives you some degree of control, but it loses you all of this. The alternative is not to go completely random, but to find the way, as Beer talked about, to get that autonomy, independence within a common purpose, within a coordinated effort. So ultimately, I think the question is not, can you find a viable business case for sustainability? The question is, how can you create one? How do you make decisions, commit capital, and sometimes bet the farm on worlds that are still coming into being? Because the fact is that you will find a business case for sustainability. You will find one, you will create one, or you will die. And I think this is the competitive landscape of the coming decades. And as Bill Gates wisely said some years ago, if you can show me the business case, you're too late. So those companies who wait to hear talks like this one, to say, can you show me the business case, are already in serious trouble. Those 70-some-odd% of those 1,500 executives that Sloan and BCG interviewed are already in trouble. Because they're still running their businesses looking through the rearview mirror rather than looking through radar. They're still focusing on old metrics that are important in themselves but don't disclose the information that some of these new metrics disclose. And they're going to play catch-up and be lucky if they survive or adapt. If this sounds a little melodramatic, just the reminder is take a look at the Fortune 500 list today and take a look at it from 5 years ago and take a look at it from 5 years before that. That is not a stable community. Companies go in and out. Some of them get absorbed, some of them die. So, my question to you in closing is will you, I'm speaking to you like you're running companies, and so whether you are or not, maybe you will be, or maybe you invest in them, or maybe you buy from them, so put on the appropriate mask. Will you escape with the familiar dodge of, well, gee, it's only business. Nothing personal, it's only business. With the intellectual laziness of, we've always done it this way. Or will you embrace the personal and business and social and political challenge of actually solving the problem? Not just working on it, not just making a noble effort to fight the good fight, but actually solving the problem, actually transforming the economy of this planet in this generation. Will you embrace the challenge of investing, of inventing and delivering profitable and viable and, dare I say, joyful pathways to what my mentor Buckminster Fuller called a world that works for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. Let's get moving. Joyce.
I have a comment and two questions. The comment, as you were talking at the beginning about that vice president who after an hour and a half asked what you were saying. A while ago, I heard the analogy that when Columbus and his 3 ships came over the horizon, the Indians were unable to see the ships because there was nothing in their ken that told them that it was out there, basically no mental model. And so as I was listening to what you were saying, it was basically, if you don't have a mental model that puts sustainability as part of the system, then you're just not going to get it.
I don't know if the Columbus story is literally true, but the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance is well known.
Okay.
And it's hard for people to see things they don't expect
They
to
don't.
see. Any of you ever seen that gorilla in the basketball video
Yes.
clip?
Yeah.
So you know. I was so dumbstruck by it that I watched it a second time, and it still worked.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah. So thank you.
So that was just, so I don't know if it works or not, but sometimes it's a good conversation. 2 questions. So related to that is that when you said that countries outside of the U.S. were more into it or open to sustainability, it seems to me that the cowboy culture that we grew up with, which does not recognize that we're part of a system, is the lack of a systems perspective within
Well, or doesn't recognize limits
limits.
to a system, yeah.
Right, or the fact that anything, waste or whatever is part of the whole system, you have some responsibility for that, is really central to what's going on. And I'm just wondering, do you address that with your clients directly?
Well, it's part of what's going on. The sense of the limitless frontier is certainly part of what's going on, at least in our culture. But part of what's going on is the Yankee can-do spirit and an incredible ability to innovate. And a spirit of entrepreneurship that is really different. If you go to France, where there's strong technical capabilities, you're going to find a very different entrepreneurial environment there than here. One of our next-door neighbor in our office complex, WDHB, does learning expeditions bringing French executives to the United States to see how we do things here. And there's a great hunger to understand what we do. We have some very powerful strengths, as well as some embedded weaknesses, and I think this is true in every country. But as the world globalizes, as the sources of competition become more and more pervasive, as different styles of innovation and entrepreneurship come to the fore, we sure as heck don't get to rest on our laurels and count on it. I mean, the biggest challenge for the United States in this century, aside from the fact that we've got, massive budget in disarray and hundreds of billions of dollars of unfunded deferred maintenance and infrastructure and a few other things, aside from all that, is the fact that we've all grown up with the USA #1 assumption, not going to be that by the middle of the century. So in addition, and that's, in economic terms, that's just fine. Sweden, at 8 or 10 million people, has a very profitable and successful and innovative society. You don't have to be the biggest to be successful, but we're in for a very interesting psychological shift that we're not prepared for, and I think that nobody knows what the impact will be as China moves into #1 economy in the world, with some very different rules and operating systems and perhaps value systems than we've been used to. So it's going to be an interesting century.
And last question.
Yes.
My firm recently began working globally with something called R20, which is the subnational, which is like a province-level sustainability effort in China and India and Europe, because there's an assumption the East-West Institute is coordinating this, that there's just too difficult at a national level, but at the subnational level, that there's a need for a lot of dialogue, and that's going on. So it's just something I became aware of this week, and I just didn't know a perspective you have on it. I thought it was interesting, those countries.
I think it's extremely important work. Schwarzenegger, when he was governor, had a series of governors' climate summits.
And he's one of the heads of this thing.
He's one of the heads of this thing, and he brought together governors from Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, and a couple of other countries who were working at the level of state or province.
Yeah, that's what it's...
Because there were things they couldn't do on national level, either because of political logjams or other issues. They're doing information sharing and programmatic exchange at that level.
And it's an opt-in.
And it's an opt-in. It's entirely voluntary. It's often tied to economic development strategies. Here in the United States, there's more than 900, probably more than 1,000 cities whose mayors have joined Mayors for Climate Protection, where cities are driving their own innovative climate strategies. We saw this in the 1970s when Nixon and the Republicans had Washington. There was an enormous amount, there was a big shift of focus to innovation on the local level. I think we're seeing that again now, both here and around the world. There are some problems that cities and states can't solve, but quite a number that they can address, given powers of budget, zoning, program. Gavin Newsom here often talked about how hard is it to drive a sustainability program that has a real impact. He said it's as hard as a stroke of a pen. San Francisco with $1 billion procurement budget, he gets to say, okay, only recycled content. Done. Moves the money. Move the money, move the markets. And so market formation, aggregated purchasing capacity is one of the more powerful tools that we have. Berkeley some years ago started looking at how the city of Berkeley and the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory and the University of California could come together to do joint purchasing, both to reduce the costs for each of them of the greener, better products, but also start to have market-forming impact. We've seen that in California for decades around automobile fuel economy standards. We see it around greenhouse gas policy now, and we see the ideologically bizarre move from the Republican side of Congress